Okay, excellent. Charles, wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Joe, wonderful. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast, and I appreciate very much that you're introducing me to your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. I want to begin our journey into your good work by asking you this. 5 years ago, this pandemic changed so many things about the way we live. How did you get through that era, and how has it affected the way that you live today?
Well, I'm a management consultant, and on the side of being a management consultant, I do research and writing on leadership and other management issues. Uh, During the pandemic, instead of meeting with clients face to face, being on site in their offices a week, 2 weeks at a time, I did it by means of Zoom and had lots of phone calls with clients. The consulting business initially dropped off, but then as businesses started having Zoom meetings and so forth, they found that they needed consultants to help them figure out how to have good Zoom meetings and how to get things done in Zoom meetings, basic stuff like that, as well as how to be a virtual leader, which is where I came in. It was actually answering the questions, how do I become a virtual leader? I realized it's basically exaggerating what you do as a leader, uh, that you do as a virtual leader, and getting key about what I consider the core of leadership, which is, put it simply, righting wrongs, as
Yeah.
opposed to just becoming more efficient, um, that you bring out in the virtual world. And so with me, I started writing the book. When the business slowed down, as it started picking up, and as I started helping people become better leaders online in the online world. And I'm still doing most of my consulting online. I miss it. There's when the kind of consulting I do, and we'll probably talk about it, I get people actually to change their leadership style. And it means changing the virtues they have. And the reason they do that is your virtues sort of hit a plateau. The simple case is, if you're a leader and you got there by working hard and being very persistent, what happens when you start leading a large organization is people start seeing that in you and they become lazy. Instead of imitating you, some people will say, I don't have to work on Fridays. And
Yeah.
so it piles up. And so you have to shift your leadership style. In helping people do that and figuring out how to shift their leadership style, because it still has to come from them, it's much easier for me to work face to face. However, I'm working much more online. So I would say the pandemic, for me, it's given me more time to write and think in a comfortable space as opposed to on a plane.
Yeah.
Uh, and I have to work much harder when I'm online. I'm a little bit less effective in the day-to-day work, trying to help people online as opposed to face, and dealing with the current emergencies and being able to walk down to the office or talk to them immediately after a phone call that didn't go so well, and so forth. Um, I do think that in New York and many places in the world, we are going back to what it was like before the pandemic. It's it's not surprising. Part of my past is as a Renaissance scholar, and of course, Black Death was something that happened before the Renaissance, and I studied that in Italy, and it took Italy 10 years, to come back to the habits that people had before, but they did. I think we're ultimately going to do that by and large because people are just much more effective face to face. We used to teach that all the time in consulting. Um, and I think people are rediscovering it to be true. But it's going to take some time, particularly in the tech world, which I think is going to be the slowest to get back into shared spaces, shared offices, and so forth. They're going to try everything they can technologically to avoid that. And it's good that they are.
Yeah.
It's a worthwhile ambition. But uh, I think ultimately looking people in the eyes will count for more.
So to get to the marrow of what you do on a daily basis, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of kids in a grade school, 12-year-olds, career day, and one of the kids wants to know what you do for a living. How do you explain it?
I talk to senior leaders in companies. And I basically ask them three questions that are hard questions for them, but they're really important questions for them and for everybody else who appreciates the company. So the first question I ask a leader, and you can think of it as a question I'm asking you and your family, or you about your family. What always goes wrong here? Not what sometimes goes wrong, but what always goes wrong. What are the problems? Now, the interesting thing is, most people that I say that to think, oh my God, that's a very hard question to answer. Who would have an answer for that? Well, the surprising thing is, most leaders that I deal with who have been in their jobs for a few years have an answer to that. So, for instance, I was working with a video game company leader a while ago. What always goes wrong? We always make games that end up appealing to the nasty sides of boys. We start out wanting to make games that are going to appeal to both boys and girls. And we have some good ideas. We have some good ideas. We have some good ideas, and we build and build and build. And then it comes to a crux time. We've got to have a climatic moment. We have to, and that's very hard. And what happens is time and money runs out, and we go back to the formula. Appeal to the nasty side. Let's beat up on somebody. Let's draw some blood. And that's what we do. And that's what always goes wrong. Another simple one, uh, might have run into. We always offer really good deals to new customers, and we don't help out our loyal customers.
Yeah.
Simple thing. Always goes wrong in the industry. Run into that. So those are just two examples. And leaders know that. And in fact, they know it because they have built a career out of working around that problem,
Yeah.
as opposed to facing it directly. So I talk to leaders about what always goes wrong in their company. And then I ask the question that turns out to be the hard question. And this is the one for the kids in the class or for anybody else is surprised when I say this is the hard question. And that is, what would you love to do instead? How are you going to go? How would you love to right this wrong? Not what's practically possible. We'll take that up later. What would you love to do instead? And you can think of this in any organization where you've been working around a problem. You can think of it in a family, husbands and wives. My wife likes this. I hate that. We work around it. What would I love to do instead? I don't know. Our whole marriage is based on working around it.
Yeah.
The same is true inside a company. But asking what would you love to do instead, that's where we have to have discussions and answer the question. I would love to create a video game that appeals to both boys and girls. Okay, good. Really? Would you like to do that? Would you like to overcome? Yes, I would. Okay, great. I want to find a way of taking care of our loyal customers that doesn't interfere with my capacity to grow my business. Whoa, interesting problem, the way you put it that way, right? And the same as for the other one. I have to have the video game is full of combat and exciting combat, but I want girls to find a role in this. Okay. When you get those problems, then you've got an interesting problem to solve. And then the next thing is, what risks do you have to take to get there? Who do you have to hire? Who do you have to fire? Who's going to believe you? What difficult conversations do you have to have with venture capitalists or the owners to do this? And how are you going to create a team that's going to back you on it? And those are the questions. Those are the bread and butter questions I handle. And those are the ones where I help people take risks. So I help people take risks. This is my summary to create businesses that are distinctive. And they're distinctive because they take something that always goes wrong in the business or the industry and they set it right. And that, number one, earns them more money because they have that as a competitive advantage. And they love their business that much more.
Yeah.
Everybody inside that business goes the extra mile. And that for me is the reward of what I do.
What did you want to be at 12 years old? What was your dream job?
I confess my dream job at 12 years old was to be a fiction writer, a
Okay.
fiction writer. And my dream job is to be Norman Mailer, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Uh, and I loved his voice. I loved his style. I loved how flamboyant he was. I think most of your listeners might not know who Norman Mailer is. Should I say a word
Y-
about Norman Mailer?
You can. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Norman Mailer. First of all, I apologize. I'm a dinosaur. So I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s. Norman Mailer took on the mantle of reviving Hemingway. And what he thought that Hemingway did, and I think he's right about what Hemingway did, Hemingway created the roles for men and for women that dominated us from, let's say, through the 30s and 40s and 50s. And if you think of any of the movies with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, that's essentially a Hemingway man, a Hemingway woman. Mailer took it on himself to revive that. That was his mission. He was flamboyant. He was a brilliant stylist as a novelist. He went into a form of journalism where he would take part in events and write about them. And his most famous books uh, did that. He actually ran for mayor of New York City at one moment. And he was thinking, he had his fingers in everything. He read philosophy, wrote about philosophy, obviously read novels, wrote about that, and was engaged in the politics of the time, the politics of the 60s, and wrote about that and brought it all together in novels like An American Dream and so forth. Um, and so that was the kind of character I wanted to be.
I love it.
Uh, yeah, I went through college wanting to be a fiction writer as well, and I went into publishing, and I discovered in publishing how hard it was, and that while I had some talent for telling stories, I was not nearly as flamboyant as those writers who told great, great stories. Uh, they are brilliant at exaggerating, exaggerating, exaggerating
Yeah.
more than I did. That's what it takes to be a great writer.
Yeah.
And and so I went off to university, a graduate school, and became a literature professor for a while.
So let me ask you this. Who's been your hero? Who's been an inspirational force for you to find your footing in your career and who you are?
Okay, well, I started out obviously Norman Mailer
Yeah.
was my hero. Um, then when I went to graduate school, certain professors became heroes, but the most important was a professor where I made a change in what I was doing. It was graduate school in those days. I think it might be still true today in literature, was very theoretical, and you had to know a lot of philosophy to be writing about literature, even. And so I started studying philosophy to do that, and I studied it under a professor named Bert Dreyfus or Hubert Dreyfus, who was a famous Heidegger scholar. But for me, what was amazing, and I learned it, and coming out of literature, you write about what the text means. And many people who write about literature write about what the text means to them, not what it means to the author, not what it means to the initial community, but what it means to them. And I was part of that. And that's what people who love literature fall into. It's not teaching literature. It's how do I love this book or how do I love that novel? Bert Dreyfus taught me to read a philosopher's text and not say what it meant to me, not even say what it meant to the philosopher writing it, but to ask, this is what he's arguing, is it true? Can I develop an independent argument for that? And always to ask, is it true? And that made Bert a sort of superstar for me.
Yeah.
I went on, worked with him. I ended up writing a book with him, my first book with Bert. But that question, is it true, is one of the ones that I bring to business all the time and has remained with me. I mean, people all the time, they say, when things get stressful, they tell people, breathe, take a breath, step back, talk to people, show vulnerability. That's all okay. I ask, what do I believe is true? What do I suspect is true? What do I know I don't know? Just those three questions, and that grounds you more than anything. So I've taken the very simple thing that philosophers do all the time. Okay, great argument, but is it true? Do I believe it? Could I argue for it independently? And I brought that into business consulting. And Bert is therefore a kind of hero, and he's remained a hero for me throughout. And it's because he brought that question of philosophy to me. And it was very rigorous about answering it. Don't let yourself ease yourself off easy. Is it really true? Is this an argument that you would expect other people to believe? And go
You know,
ahead.
I was just going to say, what's interesting? Whenever people hear leadership, they think about actual leaders, whether it was Churchill or it was a president or someone in the arts, Robert Redford yesterday passed, and he was seen as a leader for a lot of people. In
Yeah.
business, you got Bezos and all of these other people.
Yes.
But in your life and the way that you conduct business, and we all have these people we look up to, who's one of your favorite leaders of all time?
You mentioned one. I love Jeff Bezos and I love the story of what he did. Now, people tend to think of him as just a savvy businessman. Some people think of him as just somebody who brought relentlessness into business, and he certainly did. But for me, for me, the story of Bezos, which I tell in the book, is a story that, well, actually, for all important leaders, what Bezos did was he saw in the early 90s that the internet was growing like mad. Other people saw that as well. But he saw that with all the boards, if you can remember the early internet, the boards and people selling things in all sorts of helter-skelter ways, that the internet had the potential of destroying retail. And by that, I mean destroying the basic trust between a buyer and a seller, that I'm going to purchase a good at a fair price. That's the basic trust. And that sometimes is disrupted. But the reason we go to stores, the reason we engage in retail is we believe that. And he said that with all the capacity to defraud people online, to sell options of things online, you wouldn't have a stable good that you could see a photograph of, purchase it for a stable price, and have it delivered to you. And he decided he was going to save retail from the internet. And to do that, he was going to create an everything store. He was going to sell everything. Now, he never told people at the beginning, or he told only his parents and his wife at the beginning, it was going to be an everything store. Initially, it was going to be a bookstore,
Yeah.
as you remember. But the thing that they did next was, so what kind of culture do I need to take on retail, to take on, for instance, Walmart, to take on Barnes and Noble, and succeed online? And it was out of that that he developed a culture that was so relentless. People either admire it or hate it today, but it is relentless. And in the early days, if you didn't work 60 hours a week, you weren't working,
Yeah.
and he would fire you. That was considered the minimum. It was constantly raising the bar on expectations. And it was all of that it looks like, in fact, required for him to succeed in selling books and to deliver them online. And when you do that, you create a new ethical order inside the business, which he did with relentlessness counting as the top value, and outside the world. And when you have people working relentlessly, and when you have people going beyond themselves, you create, as he did, a kind of hyperconvenience that we now experience. If I'm at a restaurant, even a restaurant I love in my local neighborhood, and it takes too long for the check to come, I'm on Amazon time. I feel that they're mistreating me. There's something wrong. And the peculiar thing about Amazon is when you ask people now why they love Amazon, well, what was Amazon based on? Amazon was based on finding virtually anything you ever wanted online at a better price than you could get if you went to a bricks and mortar store. That was the reason to go there. Now, if you ask people, it's because the return policy is so easy and things come to me so quickly. And that's what he's done. He's created hyper convenience out of out of relentlessness. And the key is to do that, to create this distinctive new moral norm. I call it a moral norm because it's right for things to come really quickly to me now. Um, he had to be a very hard ass uh, employer, and so his logistics genius, the first one that figured out how you could ship all this stuff to people, a guy named Lovejoy, liked to play frisbee and hang out with his wife, wasn't going to work 60-hour weeks, and Bezos would have none of it. And he initially told Lovejoy to find a new job, find somebody to replace him. His entire team said, no, 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 don't do it. And he relented, but only after Lovejoy promised to be working 60-hour weeks minimally for Amazon. The same thing is true for the guy that made the initial site, his founding employee. When he couldn't upgrade the site, when he raised the bar, and he forcibly retired his founding employee, and he had to do tough stuff like that. So those values, relentlessness, raising the bar, customer fanaticism, and so forth, that they would stick, that they would be seen as not just good ideas, but the essence of what Amazon was about. And that risk taking, that's the kind of thing I help leaders with. And I think Bezos is a wonderful example of that. Uh, by the way, you mentioned Churchill as well.
Yeah.
He is one of my heroes. He is one of the examples in the book. In fact, he's the one that I probably learned this from the most. When Churchill came into power in 1940, people still were thinking of appeasing Hitler.
Yeah.
And in fact, his own party was still thinking of appeasing Hitler. They did a little bit too much appeasing, and they thought that that was the trap that they went in. Uh, but they retained power. They appointed Churchill prime minister, and Churchill thought this was entirely wrong. But he couldn't get people to think about it, and so he delivered speeches saying this is wrong. We have to build up the military. But when the Nazis armies invaded the Netherlands and were coming into France, the British troops in Europe were they fled to Dunkirk. And there was a good chance they could be 80% of them, they thought, would be killed by the advancing Nazi army. Churchill took the few troops he had in Calais and sent them out to fight the Nazi army and ordered them to fight to the last man. Very, very hard. And the general that was with him had been a member of that military organization. He took that hard, hard sacrifice. And we all know that they saved the troops at Dunkirk. Instead of having 80% of them lost, they saved 80% of them. But it was because of that choice. And he told his inner team, we have to replace being nice, assuming that Hitler will come to his senses with brutal realism and ferocity. But it didn't take right away.
Yeah.
Part of the reason it didn't take is because he gave the famous "we'll fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the streets and in the hills" and so forth speech. And people were so in love with that speech, they forgot that he had to sacrifice everybody at Calais.
Yeah.
His next big act was very similar. As we know, the Nazi armies took France. The French fleet was in Oran, was mostly harbored in Oran. And now the British fleet was the greatest fleet in the world, but the German fleet combined with the Italian fleet, and then if it could take the French fleet, that would be a real challenge. It's still British fleet might outnumber them, but that would be a huge challenge. And so he had to stop that. He ordered the admirals of the French fleet to either go to the New World or to demolish their ships, or he would open fire. They didn't. And he ordered his navy to open fire on the French fleet, the Allied French fleet, and killed about 1,200 French sailors and destroyed the fleet to keep the Nazis from getting it.
Yeah.
He delivered no great speech. He delivered what he called his sad duty to Parliament. And he told them, he said, this was like a Greek tragedy. He told them straight what had happened. It was a huge moral risk. Obviously, the French could have turned against the English. It could have been a total disaster, but everybody got it. And he got the biggest applause from Parliament he ever got during the war at that moment, where they realized that this is what it meant to fight Hitler.
Yeah.
You could do nothing less if you were going to win the Second World War. And that's how he shifted the moral order. It went from a moral order of affability and gentlemanly thinking to what he called it brutal reckoning, understanding the brutal facts, and then being ferocious when you needed to be ferocious. And that's how we won the Second World War. And actually, that thinking stuck with us right through, I would say, the 1980s when we brought mutually assured destruction to an end.
Yeah.
But that was the thinking behind mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
So the Churchill is a leader that does that. Bezos in business did that. Those are two of the clear cases for me. There are There are leaders that I've worked with as well, Julia Robertson in the UK and in Pelham, who changed let's say, the temp worker industry, and others. But leaders who take those kinds of risks, who see the world in a new way, see something going wrong that others don't see, want to put it right. That's what I described in the beginning of your show, and then take the risks to do it. And Churchill was exemplary in doing that.
Yeah, for sure. So the man behind the book here, I want to know this. Everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, colleagues, everyone that knows you, everyone that gets your book, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, it's simple. I'm an explainer. Uh, I used to be sort of a fierce explainer, trying to tell people how they got it wrong. I now think of myself as a sweet explainer, constantly saying, "This is this is what's cool. Don't you think it's cool too? Isn't this a new way of looking at things? Can't we change our life if we look at things this way?" Everybody tells me I'm wrong. They say that I don't. I'm still a challenging explainer, and that would be the better way to describe me. But you've heard me on your show explaining Churchill, explaining leadership,
Yeah,
explaining everything. That's me. I'm not a totalitarian explainer. I do pray. I don't try to explain things to God. I think that's probably not my role in that circumstance. But that's pretty much me.
I love it. So the great explanation here in your book, Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. If anyone wants to pick up a copy, they want to reach out to you. Anything else in your world, where's the best place for people to go?
Okay, easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn.
Okay.
LinkedIn on Charles Spinosa. And you can put a hyphen in my name. There aren't that many Charles Spinosas out there. Charles Spinosa, PhD, if you find me on Google. That's the place to find me. And the easiest place to buy the book is Goodreads or Amazon. And I'd really appreciate people buying it. I think it's great. By the way, um, the audiobook has come out. A guy named Joe Walsh has narrated it.
Okay.
People who are listening to him, I listened to him as he was doing it. He is fabulous. People are saying to me, "Charles, reading your book is a bit hard. It's a bit erudite, but when I listen to the audiobook, I get it through and through. It's a wonderful experience."
Yeah,
So if you like audiobooks, I recommend it in
I
audio
love it.
form.
Absolutely. I will put links in the show notes. This has been absolutely illuminating. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you for your brilliance, and best of luck with the book and everything else. I appreciate it.
Joe, thank you very, very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. I hope they found parts of it interesting, and I'm delighted by your questions, and I'm delighted that you let me speak on and on. Thank
It's
you.
been an
Thank
honor.
you very much.
Absolutely.